Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're going to be looking at the massive horror movie villains Iceberg. I stumbled upon this iceberg straight from icebergcharts.com and thought it looked like a ton of fun. There's been several horror movie icebergs floating around, but I've never seen one that focuses specifically on movie villains, which is a fun angle. So shout out to Fermi Paradox who created the iceberg. I'll put a link below. They did a great job putting this chart together. 8 tiers and 260 entries, this is a big one. Because this iceberg is specifically focused on the villains, I'm not going to go into big explanations of the actual movies, but zero in on the villains in particular. What's their motivation, origin, abilities, you get the idea. So without further ado, this is the horror movie villains iceberg, part 1. Okay, so let's get right into tier 1. Starting with Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th. I believe Jason Voorhees is probably the most iconic horror villain, maybe of all time, but certainly of the 80s and 90s. Even if you haven't seen a Friday the 13th movie, you know that classic hockey mask, which will forever be a mainstay at every Halloween shop. It's interesting to note that it's not actually until the third movie in the franchise that Jason adorns the iconic mask. In the second movie, he had a sack on his head, inspired by the 76 horror film The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and of course, Jason isn't really in the first movie, at least not the version of the character we know and love. If you don't know Jason's backstory, he was essentially a severely deformed child who was bullied mercilessly. During summer camp at Camp Crystal Lake, while being teased, he was pushed into a lake. Jason couldn't swim, of course, and began drowning, but there were no counselors around because they were busy partying, and so Jason died, or so everyone thought. Somehow Jason survived and lived in the woods for years, growing into a large, menacing man out for the blood of Camp Crystal Lake counselors. That's kind of the gist of it. The series retcons some things and seems to constantly change Jason's characteristics. Eventually, he's basically an immortal zombie and even goes to hell and back in one of the sequels. Michael Myers, Halloween. Michael Myers is definitely up there with Jason Voorhees as one of the most recognizable villains. While only a 6-year-old boy, Michael murdered his sister on Halloween and is sent to a mental institution. 15 years later, he escapes the facility and returns to his hometown to continue killing. Like Jason, Michael Myers seems to develop near supernatural strength and endurance as the series goes on. Another similarity is that Michael never talks and is always silent. He's often called the embodiment of evil and is simply referred to as the Shape in the original credits. Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The last of the big three, Freddy Krueger is very different from Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. He's not a hulking, slow-moving silent killer, but instead a wisecracking creep with a big personality. His striped sweater and hat are iconic, and not to mention his burned skin and of course the metal-clawed glove. Like any of these long-running franchises, there has been several changes to the origin of Freddy over the years, but the basic overview is that Freddy was a child killer. He kidnapped several children and took them back to his boiler room. He was actually arrested, but got off on his crimes due to a technicality. The parents of Elm Street, where Freddy kidnapped most of his victims, decided to take matters into their own hands, burning down Freddy's hideout with him still inside. Years later, Freddy returns, not in physical form, but in the dreams of the teenagers of Elm Street seeking revenge. Later on in the series, they explain that Freddy is the bastard son of 100 maniacs, when his mother, a nun, was accidentally trapped in an insane asylum with the inmates. A truly disturbing scenario and fitting for such a rotten villain. I've always loved Freddy because of the supernatural part of his powers. Someone who can invade your dreams and kill you is terrifying because everyone's got to sleep sometime. Plus, because most of the deaths take place in the dream world, it allows for some really crazy concepts and effects, usually involving strange transformations of Freddy. Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Leatherface originally appeared in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but became such a popular character that he eventually became the focus of most of the films in the franchise. Originally, he's introduced as part of the Sawyer family, who lost their jobs at a rural slaughterhouse and became cannibals. Here, Leatherface is a bit of an enigma. His family is insane, but they at least can communicate. Leatherface, on the other hand, seems to be mentally impaired, and he wears masks made of human skin from his victims. In the original movie, he also adorns various outfits and different skin masks to suit the situation, like one where he dresses like an old woman with an apron, and the most iconic, a suit and a mask with makeup. There have been a couple of different origin stories to Leatherface. In the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, he's born in a slaughterhouse and has a rare skin disease, so he's thrown in a dumpster and found by the Hewitt family, even though the family in the original original were called the Sawyers. So Leatherface would wear the mask as a way of hiding his deformities. I personally like the mystique of the original Leatherface because they didn't try to make him really cool or menacing. He was kind of quirky, which I think is part of what was so scary. Chucky, Child's Play. Maybe my favorite of this era of horror villains, Chucky's real name is Charles Lee Ray, a serial killer who uses voodoo to transfer his soul into a good guy doll to escape death after being shot by a cop. Now Chucky is on the hunt for a new body to transfer his soul into, or else be stuck in the doll's body forever. What really makes Chucky shine is the voice acting of Brad Dourif. He's got the perfect voice that can be both terrifying and hilarious.
You stupid you filthy
While killer dolls aren't exactly an original concept, the personality of Chucky is why he's the king. As the series went on, they took a more dark comedy turn, no longer trying to be scary, but still filled with blood and gore. My favorites are probably the bride and seed of Chucky. Chucky trying to navigate a completely dysfunctional relationship and try to be a father as a doll is great, and I think Chucky has his best look here with his face stapled back together. Plus, this is when they went full over the top dark comedy with everything from a John Waters cameo to doll sex scenes. Pinhead, Hellraiser. Like Leatherface, Pinhead was originally part of a group of villains in the original Hellraiser movie, but he had such a great look that he became the central reoccurring villain through the franchise. Pinhead is a Cenobite, a demonic entity from another dimension, easily recognizable by his pale, mutilated face adorned with an intricate grid of scars and nails hammered into his skull at each intersection. Before becoming Pinhead, he was Elliot Spencer, a British military officer who became disillusioned with humanity and sought out the lament configuration to transcend ordinary experiences. Eventually, he became the leader of the Cenobites and is responsible for inflicting extreme forms of sadomasochistic torture on those who summon him. What's interesting about Pinhead is he's not inherently evil, he just abides by a twisted moral code centered around pain and pleasure. Although as the series progresses, he does become much more openly antagonistic. He also stands out as being fairly calm and well-spoken. He often speaks in a measured, almost poetic way, delivering lines that emphasize the existential horror of his victims' fates.
The eternal refrain of humanity, pleading ignorance, begging for mercy. Please help me. I don't understand.
Count Dracula. There's been many iterations of Dracula over the years, most notably Bela Lugosi's portrayal in the original Universal film. Although my favorite portrayal is probably Christopher Lee's version in the Hammer movies. Probably just because the gloves are off here and there was much more blood and gore in these films. There's really no use going too deep on this one because he's such a well-known character and the heart of all vampire fiction. Frankenstein's monster. On par with Dracula is Frankenstein's monster. We all know the drill here. Dr. Victor Frankenstein finds a way to reanimate the dead. He goes grave robbing and builds a man out of various human body parts and brings the corpse back to life using the power of lightning. This story has probably had more iterations and parodies than even Dracula. My favorite being Young Frankenstein, which is my favorite Frankenstein movie. It, or Pennywise the Clown. This one can go really deep because it is actually a cosmic entity that has a wild backstory. Luckily, I just read the book recently, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. Unfortunately, so is that one scene. Yeah, let's not talk about that chapter. Well, as I said, it is a cosmic entity that comes to Earth living beneath the town of Derry and feasting on its residents. Mostly kids because their fear is simple and pure, whereas the fear of adults is too complicated. It can take the shape of anything the human mind can imagine, but typically in the form of what they fear most. One very common form it takes is Pennywise the Dancing Clown, and this is the most recognizable entity in the It films. Originally portrayed by Tim Curry in the 90s movie, and more recently by Bill Skarsgård, both portrayals are pretty scary in their own way. The original 1990 film was actually a two-part TV miniseries, and a lot of kids were traumatized by accidentally seeing this at a young age. And this seems to have been a big factor in the increase of people being afraid of clowns. Hannibal Lecter, The Silence of the Lambs. Made iconic by the film Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter is a hyper-intelligent serial killer, known for being extremely polite and possessing exquisite manners despite being a serial murderer and cannibal. He has a pretty tragic backstory. He was born in Lithuania to a wealthy aristocratic family. However, during World War II, his family was killed and he and his sister Misha were captured by looters. These looters ultimately resorted to cannibalism, killing and eating Misha and forcing Hannibal to eat her as well, which would explain why he turned out to be such a psychopath. The TV show Hannibal showcases more of these details and more of Hannibal's brutal murders, but the film Silence of the Lambs features him in his much more recognizable look, played by Anthony Hopkins, adorning the straitjacket and human muzzle. Ghostface, Scream. Ghostface is another one of those villains that has become synonymous with Halloween, as the classic Ghostface mask continues to show up every Halloween. What's interesting about this villain is that it's actually not a single person, as multiple people have worn the mask to commit murders throughout the series. Despite Ghostface being worn by many antagonists, there is some similar characteristics, which are the classic knife as a weapon and the use of threatening phone calls. Originally, the killer would call the victim and ask horror movie trivia on the phone to taunt them.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason! Jason! Jason!
I'm sorry. That's the wrong answer.
The concept was mocked in Scary Movie, and because of this, people often associate the Ghostface mask with that franchise as well, mostly due to this classic scene.
Yo.
What's up?
Jack Torrance, The Shining. Jack Torrance is the main antagonist in Kubrick's The Shining. Well, in reality, the main antagonist is the Overlook Hotel itself, and Jack is just used as a tool. Jack is a writer and alcoholic who becomes the caretaker at the Overlook Hotel in Colorado. Because of the severity of the weather, the hotel is closed through the winter with only the caretaker left to watch over the place. So Jack, his wife, and his son move into the hotel. However, there's a strange presence within the hotel that slowly drives Jack insane, convincing him to try and kill his wife and child. Obviously, Jack Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance is unforgettable, as he becomes truly terrifying, leading to one of the most notable scenes in horror cinema. Sadako Yamamura, The Ring. Sadako is the main antagonist of the Ring movies. There are several different versions of her origin depending on what movie, but the basic gist is that she was a young girl with psychic powers who was eventually murdered by being thrown down a well. She comes back as a vengeful spirit. One of Sadako's psychic abilities is called ninja or thoughtography, where she can project images onto physical surfaces. Using her ninja ability, Sadako projected her anger, pain, and images related to her tragic death onto a videotape and cursed it. So anyone who watched the tape would be cursed to die after 7 days. Sadako is just as iconic as many of the American horror villains on here. Her long black hair covering her face is synonymous with J-horror, and the freaky way she crawls out of the TV to pursue her victim is a great moment in horror history. Xenomorphs, Alien. The Xenomorphs are the central threat in the Alien franchise and are forever embedded in pop culture. Xenomorphs were originally created by an advanced race of beings known as the Engineers as a form of bioweapon. Basically, you could unleash the Xenomorphs on a planet and it would eventually annihilate the inhabitants. This backstory with the Engineers is pretty complex, and since the focus here is on a specific villain, I'll mostly look at the Xenomorph as it's portrayed in the original Alien movie. The Xenomorph life cycle works like this. A queen Xenomorph first lays eggs. These eggs contain what are known as face huggers that implant their victim with an embryo. Eventually, this embryo rapidly grows and bursts through the host's chest, giving them the nickname chest burster. This creature then rapidly grows into a full-grown xenomorph, adopting some of the characteristics of its host, which is explored in the later films as the xenomorphs take different forms depending on what creature they used. But in Alien, the xenomorph looks somewhat humanoid with an elongated head and tail. The original design for xenomorphs were actually by H.R. Geiger, a surrealist artist that blended human physique with machines. These creatures are experts at stealth and have acidic blood. Plus, you can't forget about the weird mouth within a mouth that's so freaky. Bruce. Jaws. While the shark in Jaws was never given an actual name in either film or novel, the name Bruce originates from the name given to the original animatronics by Steven Spielberg himself. Although, let's be honest, most people just call the shark Jaws. Well, either way, the shark is 25 feet long, weighs 4.9 tons, and killed 5 people before being blown to bits by an exploding scuba tank. Candyman. Originating from Clive Barker's short story The Forbidden, Candyman was once a talented African-American artist in the late 19th century who was brutally murdered by a lynch mob for his relationship with a white woman. His hand was severed, he was smeared with honey, and stung to death by bees. Now, in urban legend, Candyman can be summoned by saying his name 5 times in front of a mirror, at which point he appears with a hook for a hand and exacts bloody revenge on those who call him. The thing I think of most about this movie is how it revitalized the Bloody Mary game, only with Candyman instead. And I remember it being a common thing at sleepovers to dare your friends to say Candyman 5 times in the mirror with the lights off. The Predator. The Predator comes from an alien species which travels the galaxy seeking the most formidable prey to hunt for sport and honor. The creature is equipped with advanced weaponry, including cloaking devices, plasma casters, and wrist blades, while sporting dreadlock-like appendages, mandibles, and thermal vision. Predators hunt humans and other species they deem worthy opponents, following a code of honor that respects strength and combat prowess. Their presence is marked marked by their iconic growl and the use of trophies, often collecting skulls and spines as symbols of their victories. I always like the concept of the predators because they're an actual intelligent life form rather than some wild beast. Annabelle the doll, The Conjuring. Annabelle is a cursed doll originally appearing briefly in The Conjuring, but later getting her own film. The doll is based on a real-life Raggedy Ann doll, but depicted as a more sinister porcelain doll in the films. Unlike Chucky, Annabelle is actually just a conduit for a demonic entity, rather than the doll itself being possessed. It's revealed in the prequel movie, Annabelle Creation, that Annabelle Mullins, a young girl, died in a tragic accident, and her grieving parents unknowingly allowed a malevolent spirit to inhabit the doll. The demon uses the doll to manipulate and terrorize those around it, often causing supernatural disturbances and violent incidents. The Warrens, paranormal investigators, and main characters of the Conjuring franchise eventually take custody of Annabelle and place her in their occult museum to contain her evil influence. Jigsaw. Saw. Jigsaw, also known as John Kramer, is the primary antagonist in the Saw movies. Originally a civil engineer diagnosed with terminal cancer, Kramer becomes the Jigsaw killer, though he never directly murders his victim. Instead, he places them in elaborate and deadly traps designed as moral tests to encourage self-reflection and survival through extreme sacrifice. John has a strong and twisted sense of justice and a desire to teach his victims the value of life, so he selects individuals he deems morally flawed, forcing them to confront their wrongdoings and make harrowing choices to save themselves. His traps often involve complex mechanisms and psychological torture, leaving survivors physically and emotionally scarred. Although John Kramer is a normal man, the name Jigsaw is often associated with Billy the Puppet, a doll used by Kramer to explain how the tests work, usually through video, which really gives a creepy look. Okay, we're moving into Tier 2, starting with Norman Bates, Psycho. Norman Bates is the antagonist in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. He's a deeply disturbed individual shaped by his traumatic childhood and his unhealthy relationship with his mother. After the death of his father, Norman becomes intensely attached to his mother, who controls and manipulates him. When she begins a relationship with another man, Norman's jealousy leads him to murder them both. Unable to cope with the fact that he killed his own mother, Norman develops a split personality, embodying both himself and his mother. He preserves her corpse and, under her persona, continues her behavior. Norman runs the Bates Hotel, where he occasionally succumbs to his mother's persona, leading to violent outbursts and murders of guests he finds threatening or arousing. Norman has a very meek and polite demeanor, which really contrasts with the violent tendencies of his mother personality. Carrie White. Carrie. One of the most tragic villains on the list, Carrie White is a shy, introverted high school senior tormented by her peers and abused by her fanatically religious mother. After a humiliating incident at school triggers her latent telekinetic powers, Carrie is invited to the prom by a remorseful classmate's boyfriend. However, after a cruel prank at the prom where she's doused in pig's blood, she's pushed to unleash her powers, resulting in a deadly rampage that completely devastates the school and its students. Returning home, she's then attacked by her mother, whom she kills in self-defense before succumbing to her grief and causing their house to collapse, leading to her own death. Count Orlok, Nosferatu. Count Orlok is technically just a version of Dracula, but Orlok has become so recognizable in his own right that he's worth a separate entry. Even though Nosferatu is basically an adaptation of the original Dracula novel, the producers couldn't secure the rights, so they changed the name to Nosferatu and also changed the names of the characters, most notably Count Dracula to Count Orlok. I have to say though, Orlok is a great version of Dracula. His grotesque appearance with elongated fingers, pointed ears, and rat-like teeth are really creepy, and his image alone has carved a place in horror history. Besides the 1922 film, Nosferatu was also remade in 1979. This time they used all the proper names, but Dracula is clearly modeled after the original Orlok look. There's also Shadow the Vampire, which is a fictionalized biopic about the making of the 1922 film, where the director hired an actual vampire to play Orlok, which is a neat idea. Plus Willem Dafoe plays Orlok, which is just perfect casting. Patrick Bateman, American Psycho. Patrick Bateman, portrayed by Christian Bale in the 2000 film American Psycho, is a wealthy and successful investment banker living in 1980s Manhattan who is secretly a serial killer. He's obsessed with status and appearances and embodies the superficial and materialistic culture of the era. He engages in brutal acts of murder and torture, often targeting people he believes to be beneath him, such as sex workers and homeless people, but eventually even friends and colleagues. This movie and character were originally misunderstood, but later people began to realize it was actually a dark comedy and has since become a fan favorite. Pazuzu, The Exorcist. Pazuzu is the name of the demon in The Exorcist who possesses Regan McNeil. The demon exhibits several supernatural powers, including telekinesis, levitation, and superhuman strength. It also seems to have the ability to speak in multiple languages, including ones unknown to the possessed individual, and has extensive knowledge of the people around it, using this information to taunt and manipulate. The possession leads to drastic physical changes in Regan, with her appearance becoming grotesque and her voice altering, making her one of the scariest faces in horror. Although we mostly see Pazuzu in the form of the possessed Regan, there are several times in the film where for a brief moment we see the demonic form of Pazuzu as well. Imhotep, the Mummy. Imhotep, or the Mummy, is an ancient Egyptian priest who is punished for attempting to resurrect his forbidden lover. He is mummified alive and buried with a curse. However, he becomes unwittingly resurrected in the 20th century by archaeologists. There's obviously some differences in the 1932 film and the 1999 film, but the Mummy basically has the same motivation and abilities such as immortality, telepathy, and hypnotism, although these are more subtle in the original 1932 film. The Wolfman. Another tragic villain is the Wolfman. Larry Tabolt is bitten by a werewolf while trying to save a young woman and transforms into a werewolf during the full moon. Now he must struggle with his cursed fate as he becomes a monster. There's obviously been many iterations of this monster, but the original Lon Chaney Jr. portrayal always stands out because of the outstanding effects of the time that took hours to apply. Pamela Voorhees, Friday the 13th. As I mentioned earlier, Jason Voorhees doesn't actually appear in the first Friday the 13th movie other than a dreamlike scare at the very end. Although the movie plants the idea that the killer is Jason, it's actually Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mom. After her deformed son drowned in the lake while the counselors weren't paying attention, she's sworn revenge, killing off the counselors and keeping the camp forever closed. Jerry Dandridge, Fright Night. Jerry Dandridge is the vampire antagonist in Fright Night. Jerry moves into a quiet suburban neighborhood and begins finding new victims when his neighbor Charlie finds out he's a vampire. From there, the two form an antagonistic relationship as Charlie tries to convince everyone he's a vampire and Jerry threatens to kill him. He's a great villain because he's really charming and likable, making him all the more scary when he finally transforms. Mr. Babadook, the Babadook. The Babadook is a mysterious entity that manifests through a sinister pop-up book that appears in the home of Amelia and her young son Samuel. Described in the book as a dark, shadowy figure with a top hat and long claw-like fingers, Mr. Babadook embodies the grief and unresolved trauma that Amelia experiences following the death of her husband. As the story progresses, the creature becomes increasingly real and threatening, terrorizing both mother and son with psychological torment and physical manifestations. While the Babadook is clearly symbolic, I was glad that the movie didn't do the whole "you just imagined him" thing, and I like that at least within the universe of the movie, the creature actually exists. Valak, the Conjuring. Valak is an ancient demon and the overarching antagonist in the Conjuring universe, most notably featured in The Conjuring 2 and The Nun. Valak is a sinister entity that takes on the form of a demonic nun to instill fear and manipulate its victims. Valak's true form is a horrifying skeletal figure with dark, piercing eyes and a malevolent presence. As a master of deception and fear, Valak uses psychological torment and supernatural powers to manipulate and terrorize its targets. The Blob. One of the goofiest villains on the list, the Blob is a red gelatinous space alien that consumes humans as it grows in size. Despite being kind of a silly creature, the Blob is pretty formidable as it is immune to physical damage and can't be killed. Its only weakness is cold temperatures. In the original Blob movie, they transport it to the Arctic so it will stay frozen indefinitely. Audrey 2, Little Shop of Horrors. Audrey 2 is a sentient carnivorous plant discovered by Seymour Krelborn, a florist's assistant. Initially small and seemingly harmless, it turns out the plant feeds on human blood. Seymour provides this himself at first, but as Audrey 2 grows, it requires full human bodies to consume. This continues to get out of hand, and it is eventually revealed that Audrey 2 is just a mean green mother from outer space. John Doe, 7. John Doe is the central antagonist in the movie Seven. He's obsessed with the 7 deadly sins and targets people who have committed any of these sins and then tortures and kills them. He hates that people have become openly immoral and wants to set a precedent for society with his killings. Annie Wilkes, Misery. Annie Wilkes, famously portrayed by Kathy Bates, is a former nurse with a deeply obsessive and unstable personality who becomes dangerously fixated on her favorite author, Paul Sheldon. When Paul is injured in a car accident near her remote home, Annie rescues him and takes him captive, seemingly to nurse him back to health. However, her true intentions become clear as she discovers that Paul has killed off her favorite character, Misery Chastain, in his latest novel. Enraged and delusional, Annie forces Paul to rewrite the story according to her desires, subjecting him to physical and psychological torture whenever he resists. Annie's personality seems to suggest that she has severe paranoia and possibly borderline personality disorder. She also has long bouts of depression and actively maims herself as well as overeating. What makes her so terrifying is that she puts on a cheerful facade while committing these horrible acts. Sam. Trick or treat. Sam is essentially the embodiment of Halloween itself. He looks like an average trick-or-treater with a large burlap sack on his head. However, his true face is revealed in the final act, and we see that he has an actual pumpkin-like head. He appears in the anthology film Trick or Treat and serves as the connecting tissue between the four stories, showing up in every segment and being the main antagonist of the fourth story. As a spirit of Halloween, he has several rules regarding the holiday, and if someone breaks them, he'll kill them. These rules consist of things like always giving trick-or-treaters candy, always wearing a costume, and never extinguishing the flame of a jack-o'-lantern before midnight. His abilities include regeneration, necromancy, teleportation, telekinesis, and has a general supernatural aura. Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man. Jack Griffin, otherwise known as the Invisible Man, was one of the original Universal monsters, or at least was lumped into that group alongside Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Mummy. He was a chemist who found the formula to turn invisible. The only problem is the formula consists of a chemical that causes him to also go mad, and he eventually begins murdering people. Billy Chapman, Silent Night, Deadly Night. Billy Chapman is the Santa suit wearing killer of Silent Night, Deadly Night. As a 5-year-old, Billy watched a robber kill his father and mother while wearing a Santa suit, which traumatized him. He's then placed in an orphanage until he's 18, when he finally leaves and tries to start a new life. He gets a job at a department store, but when they ask him to dress up as Santa, he finally snaps and goes on a killing spree. Slender Man. Originally just a creepypasta, Slender Man grew so popular that he eventually was featured in several films, most notably Slender Man and Always Watching, a Marble Hornet story. Well, I'll tell you what you already know. Slender Man is depicted as unnaturally tall and thin with a blank featureless face. He's usually shown wearing a black suit and is described as having tentacle-like appendages and the ability to teleport. The Birds. The Birds are the titular threat in the classic Hitchcock flick, and the movie never actually explains why they're attacking. One day, they just decide to start killing people. I kind of like that though, because if The Birds was remade today, they'd probably make an elaborate sci-fi backstory about how human pollution or some satellite malfunction caused the birds to go into a frenzy. Sometimes it's okay to just ask, what would you do if all the birds in the world just started trying to kill you? And that's enough by itself. Triffids. The Day of the Triffids. The Triffids are carnivorous plant creatures that have the ability to move and communicate. The Triffids are unleashed after a meteor shower over Earth blinds most humans and at the same time releases Triffid spores. These towering plants have whip-like appendages equipped with venomous stingers that they use to immobilize and kill their prey. The Triffids can regenerate, making them extremely hard to damage, but the humans learn that salt water or seawater can kill them. The Creatures, Bird Box. The entities in Bird Box are mostly enigmas as their origin, motives, intent, and appearance are unknown. Anyone that looks at the creatures goes completely mad and will try to off themselves. This includes animals as well. However, some people who look at the entities see them as angels and help them to hunt down other humans. It appears that these people are already mentally unstable to begin with. There's really not much more information than that, but I like that these monsters are so vague because it gives more room for theories about what they are and their origins, which range from being alien invaders, biblical demons, and there's even a theory that the whole thing is simply mass hysteria and that there are no creatures. Brundlefly, the Fly. Seth Brundle is a scientist who builds teleportation pods. He can teleport matter from one pod to the other, however, he has trouble teleporting living beings. After a few messy failed attempts, he successfully teleports himself. However, unbeknownst to him, a fly got into the pod with him, merging the fly's DNA with his. At first, this doesn't seem so bad as he gains immense strength and flexibility, but his personality is affected as well. He becomes hostile and dangerous, specifically to his new girlfriend. His body then begins to change more rapidly as he takes on the physical appearance of a giant insect. This is one of the quintessential body horror movies in my opinion, and I even made a whole video about it. But as Seth turns completely into Brundlefly and loses his humanity, he becomes a terrifying creature and a truly tragic villain. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Henry is a psychopathic serial killer who seems to murder indiscriminately. He's based on the real-life killer Henry Lee Lucas, aka the Confession Killer, who told police he had killed over 600 people. This number seems to be embellished, but he was connected to a large number of deaths. The Henry in the film is sent to jail as a young man for killing his mother, who was a prostitute that forced Henry to watch her in the act as a child and would punish him if he looked away. After he gets out of prison, he immediately goes on a killing spree with his friend and cellmate Otis. The two randomly constantly break into houses and kill the families inside, even videotaping it to watch as entertainment later. There's no clear motivation for Henry other than the apparent thrill he gets from murder, and he actually seems repulsed by sex. His general philosophy seems like a twisted dog-eat-dog mentality, feeling like he must kill or be killed. What stands out about this film in particular is the fact that Henry is the main character and he never sees justice for his crimes in the film. In fact, as the film ends, he just goes along on his way to presumably kill more victims. Benjamin Willis. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Benjamin Willis was walking home at night when a group of teenagers ran him over in their car. Assuming him to be dead, the teenagers didn't call for help, but instead dumped his body in the ocean and swore to keep the incident secret. 1 year goes by and Ben seemingly survives. He sports a fisherman's outfit and a hook, giving him the nickname The Fisherman. He now goes on a revenge killing spree against the teens. Honestly, out of the 90s slashers, this villain has some of the best motivation, and it's hard to blame him. Obviously, this doesn't make what he's doing okay, but they did almost kill the guy. Graboids, Tremors. Graboids are the giant sandworm-like creatures that attack the residents of Perfection, Nevada, and other regions shortly after. There's not a clear origin of the Graboids, and there's kind of mixed explanations throughout the movies, one being that they're prehistoric creatures that are older than any life form on Earth, but only grew to the large size when they had other creatures to eat, and there's some implications that they might be of alien origins. The Graboids are extremely formidable monsters as they stay burrowed underground for the most part, making them hard to target. They can reach speeds up to 20 miles an hour, they're strong enough to destroy vehicles and small structures, and can eat a human whole. They mostly track their prey by sensing vibrations on the ground and moving towards that location. The Beldam, Coraline. The Beldam, or Other Mother, is the main antagonist of the 2009 animated film Coraline. She's an evil, interspatial, shape-shifting entity who lures children into another dimension with the goal of consuming their flesh. For most of the film, the Beldam takes on the appearance of Coraline's actual mother, but with slightly off features and button eyes. Other Mother slowly transforms throughout the movie, eventually taking her true skeletal arachnid form. The Beldam's abilities include shape-shifting, creating copies of other beings, and several more vague powers, controlling different aspects of the other world. Okay, so we made it through tiers 1 and 2. I'm excited to get into the next few tiers and learn more about some lesser known villains. I love this kind of shit, so this has been really fun to work on. Shout out again to Fermi Paradox on icebergcharts.com for making this one, and big shout out to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Laz Wishgender, Glimmering Haster, Hunter Piva, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Ricky Shadow, Chase Middleton, Strong Kohi, Matt Rozak, Glenn Bridges, Steamboat Millie, The Beast Llama, and Holy Ears. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus content, consider becoming a patron. The link is below. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.